So first of all, I need to issue a little bit of a correction because I got a little bit too excited and said that the reform down in Lincolnshire County Council had axed some of their flood defence staff. That wasn't true. However, I will say this now: if you look at the stuff that they're saying, where they're going to get cuts from, I think that is very, very much on the cards. And what they have essentially done today, which they very much have damaged now, I think the flood defense preparedness, the scrutiny, working with other bodies, as we'll see in a moment, is going to lead to future bad outcomes for not only flood defense, but flooding in the Lincolnshire region. Now, my own town council, where we haven't had too many cases of flooding, but however, it has happened. My own town council has a very similar committee because they are worried that with, climate change, which again is something these reform people deny, that we are now seeing ever more bad incidents of flooding, increased risk of flooding in areas that had never experienced flooding before. And it's not just as some of these reform people have claimed that, oh, you've just built a house on a floodplain. Of course it's going to flood. Some of these places that have been flooded aren't on floodplains. Some of the stuff in my own area recently got flooded, 2 or 3 years, or what even longer than that now. That wasn't on a floodplain. Now, having this type of committee, having this type of discussions on your town council is important. And you are going to see the damage this has done, I think, to the people now potentially living in that area. I think very, very bad on a lot of scales. So if you do live in Lincolnshire, you might want to now look into your own flood preparedness. What you maybe have to do if flooding should suddenly happen in your area. Look at your own flood defenses. There are certain devices you can get. Maybe you want to think about, having your own set of sandbags maybe somewhere just in case. I don't know. Seems to be going that way indeed. But let's, of course, go to Lincolnshire Live to see what they have to say about covering all this. But this is, of course, just probably one of the first of many of the big mistakes that Reform UK are doing up and down the country with these decisions they're making. Now, let's get into this. But before we do that, please remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button down below. Of course, there is the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. So, Reform cuts the Lincolnshire County Council Flooding Committee despite now serious mistake warning. So, Reform UK has scrapped a flooding committee on its first day in charge of Lincolnshire County Council, despite the pleas now from other parties to save it. The new administration said the change would save money and simplify the council without harming efforts to fight flooding. This absolutely will harm efforts to fight flooding, as you will see in a moment. So, the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee previously allowed councillors now to hold bodies like Anglican Water, the environment agencies, and the internal drainage boards to account. On the new committee, those groups ain't going to be invited. There's going to be no part of those groups. There's going to be nothing done. They cannot hold those groups to account. And instead, as it continues to say here, flooding will now sit in the Environmental Committee, which already deals with issues such as waste and pollution, and those groups will not be automatically invited. The Environment Committee deals with a whole range of issues. You had a specific committee which solely dealt with flooding. On this Environment Committee, the issue of flooding, which you, especially down in that area in the Midlands, we have seen over the past couple of years, increased risk of flooding, more floods, more severe floods than we've seen before. that entire committee was focused on that issue. Now it's in the Environment Committee. Oh, well, what's on the agenda today? We've got flooding, maybe some fly tipping, maybe this, this, and this. Do you think the issue of flooding is going to be given enough time that it needs to be scrutinized by this one committee? I don't think so. So it will now meet 8 times a year instead of 4. Opposition councillors described the change as a downgrade, which meant that flooding will now be put on the back burner and the partnerships would now be damaged. Again, I agree. It is going to be very, very, very bad. Councillor Ian Carrington from the Conservatives said, flooding isn't just about technical solutions. It requires a web of complex relationships to work better. Those are all forged and sustained in this committee. Abolishing it now will reduce the cooperation and now silence the voices which should be heard. The Labour group leader, Councillor Karen Lee, described the change as reckless, foolhardy, and wrong. Independent council leader Phil Dills, I think that's how you say it, or Dillix, I think that's how you say it, I'm not sure, said that now even more dedicated time was needed, not less. Some councillors even remarked that it was unusual for Conservatives, Labour, the Liberal Democrats, and the Independents all to agree on the same issue. Councillor Lindsay Crawley of the Conservatives said this proposal was made out of inexperience, although there are, of course, good intentions. Please don't disagree because we are the opposition. Listen, because we have had many years of waking up at 3 a.m. to calls about flooding. Oh. So 3 a.m. to calls about flooding. Lincolnshire, and again, this is why this is important. This is why you have a board dedicated to this. Lincolnshire has now suffered some of the worst flooding in its histories during the recent deluges now from Storm Babet and Henk, along with now fresh flooding in January. So why would you cut this? It makes no sense, especially as it's highlighted there. You have, in a very, very rare instance on a county council, every single other group in agreement that cutting this would be wrong. So the Reform councillor Danny Brooks, who now takes over the portfolio for environment, insisted that this is an upgrade, not a downgrade, and existing partnerships maintained and enhanced. You are not just going to be discussing just the issue of flooding on that environmental committee. You will be discussing a range of things, right? How are you going to give the appropriate time to flooding, flood defense, flood planning, flood response? It might require to the environmental committee, while a whole range of other issues might be needed to be discussed as well. And remember, those partnerships, they're not automatically invited to this. On the other committee, they were. This is a downgrade, despite what these Reform councillors are saying. So the new leader, Sean Matthews from Reform, promised that this new administration would work, quote, longer and harder on flooding than ever before. Well, we'll see if that's right. Whether you think, and then this is where you get to the climate denialism they've got going on, whether you think it's man-made or natural cycles of events, we won't neglect flooding. Sounds like you will. Sounds like you will with that statement alone. We were elected on a mandate to reduce waste and simplifying the council, and this will do that. How does this simplify the council where you had a committee that solely focused on flooding, where you have had some of the worst flooding in recent history, even in this year, in January? Why? Just what? All I can say is hope that you don't get any bad flooding from now with these guys in charge. Anyway, the amendment now to stop the change was defeated by defeated by along party lines, with all the reform members against and all the opposition councillors voting in favour. So let me just get into some of these things on this. Yep, reform, all hype, already making mistakes. So when flooding happens, and it will, with damage now the likely result, who will they blame? Possibly the Environment Agency, but it certainly won't be themselves. Yep. And then this is what I was talking about, the problem here. The problem is the voting public do not understand these committees. The F&W now takes a lot of time. And by adding it to the environment, it will now not get the time that it has now, and it won't include the water companies or environment agencies, etc. Start investing in wellies and sandbags. So even people can already see this is going to go bad. Like this is going to go bad. That's going to go very, very bad for Lincolnshire. And hey, as that guy said, probably start looking at, investing in your own, good pair of wellies, maybe waders, your own sandbags. Because that's why that committee existed, so that they could dedicate the time that it needed and it deserved just to that specific subject. But now, grouped back in under environment, how are they going to dedicate all that time? Are you going to have an entire meeting dedicated to flooding? I doubt it. Very much doubt it. You're just not going to have the time to do so. And I want to point out, as it was said there, it is very, very rare in local politics. All parties, even the independents, agree as to say, you should not get rid of this committee. That is rare. So reform there, pretty much making a colossal mistake. And I guarantee you now, we are going to see future statements from these Lincolnshire County Council people when flooding happens. And yeah, I suspect they'll blame the Environment Agency, they'll blame the government, they'll blame everyone but themselves, because they got rid of an entire committee whose entire job was to work with partnerships. Gone. As I've said before, good luck. Like I say, in a couple of years' time, by the looks of it, my own hometown I could be in a very similar state. So yeah. Anyway, if you live in Lincolnshire, as I said, and I'll repeat it before, start investing in some wellies, some waders, sandbags. Good luck. You're gonna need it. So, as always, let me know what you think down below in the comments. And of course, do remember to like and share this video as well. So, as always, we'll see you all next time.